Why am I doing this to myself? Why am I choosing to do drugs every day? Why am I choosing to eat badly every day? It doesn't matter what it is. If you're betraying yourself, it's going to show up in your life.
Yasmine Gould has spent years unlocking the secrets of personal transformation.
A life and relationship coach, she's helped thousands step into their power,
Break free from self-doubt and create a life they truly love.
Notice that a lot of men want women to bring them peace, but a woman first has to be peaceful in herself before she can give peace to somebody else. And it's the same for men.
Let's say a man he's listening to this now and he's like, am I a divine masculine?
Divine masculine can absolutely have the capacity to kill. If I'm in bed with my husband, if somebody breaks into the house, I don't need to worry too much. Babe, I'm just going to lock you in the bedroom, but I'm just going to go take care of some stuff right now. It'd be really important to look at Trump's personal astrology as the president of America. And if you were to look at his chart, you might be able to predict what's going to happen, huh?
For anybody listening who doesn't know Yaz, who is Yaz?
That's a good question. I've not been asked that in quite some time, actually. I suppose Yaz is a human that has been on a very interesting journey, like many of you. And my journey has led me to a place where I don't think I'd like to use the word obsessed, but very invested in applying myself to my personal triggers and using them as a tool, as a vehicle to develop and evolve and teach other people to do the same. And I sort of live in this place of authenticity, which, as you will know, leads to a place of alignment. And so now anything that is outside of what feels authentic to me, I struggle to be around or do or be with. So I've turned into my work and into, I know, my life, my existence, I suppose you'd frame it like that.
Really cool.
Sounds a bit woo-woo, to be honest, when I phrase it like that.
That's where we're going. I love it. And like, so let's just dive right in, because you mentioned triggers here.
Yeah.
Many people get triggers by many things.
Yes.
You know, you go onto social media, you can see many videos that would trigger you, and you know, it's kind of this thing of
Some are designed to do that, hey?
yeah, creating controversy.
Yeah,
So
like if you think about people like, what's his name? Tate.
oh yeah,
He loves to say some stuff to
Yeah.
rile people
Very
up.
clever.
He's very smart.
very clever, very
Yeah,
smart.
smart guy.
Yeah. So when you think of triggers, like what does that mean to you?
Yeah, you know, I think it's really important to clarify what that is. So I think it's, you know, in this day and age, because people have started, especially through the vehicle of social media, which is a phenomenal tool, we've started to embrace psychological language quite a lot more. You know, like there's, you know, people use the terminology of things like narcissist and gaslighting, and sometimes people understand what it is, and sometimes people have a slightly skewed understanding of what that actually means. And so an emotional trigger is, right now, you and I are both calm and collected. We're regulated. Our nervous systems are regulated. We're calm. Whenever you experience an extreme emotion, and usually we tend to look at the more uncomfortable ones like anger or sadness, jealousy, hatred, fear, frustration, that is an emotional trigger. That's emotional dysregulation, right? And that is usually triggered by something. So let's say someone goes through their partner's phone and realizes they've been bitching about them or they've cheated on them. That is going to act as a trigger that dysregulates your emotional nervous system.
And like, if someone was to get triggered by something like that, or even just something that they saw, how do you see that as a growth opportunity? Because you mentioned that's something that you've been able to integrate that. Yeah,
that's a great question. So I like to use the phrase, this might be triggering for some, if it triggers you, it's yours. So naturally, the human ego, right, it wants to be right. Like we all believe what we believe and think what we think because we believe we're right, right? All of us. I definitely know that when I was less conscious than I am now, I used to feel like, and this was what was around me as well at the time, if I'm angry and you've done something that makes me angry, it's your fault and you should do something to change, because if I'm angry, it means that what you've done is wrong. And that's how many people feel. And that's, once you get a bit more educated about this stuff, you start to realize, that's not quite how it goes, actually, because the world is not designed to walk on eggshells around my triggers or your triggers or anybody else's. We are not in control of anybody but ourselves. We're not in control of the economy, racism, sexism, voting. We're not in control of anything other than our reaction to what goes on around us. And depending upon where you are in the world, that will change. Depending upon your skin colour, your gender, that will change. I think that if it triggers you, it's yours is a great saying, because the moment that you become dysregulated it's showing you a part of you that needs your attention. Now, that doesn't mean that whatever the other person has done to trigger you is okay. There are going to be times where that also needs attention, for sure. But just because their behaviour might require some attention or some fine-tuning, shall we say, it doesn't mean that you can ignore your trigger, because your trigger it's an opportunity, it's an invitation to meet yourself deeply. So, for example, let's take something quite small. Let's just say someone is very angry about something not to do with the dog, and they kick the dog, or they're abusive to the dog, or they snap at the dog. It's not the dog's fault. You're projecting your discomfort onto an innocent being. You see this a lot in relationships, right? Someone comes home, they've had a bad day, they snap at their partner. And the reality is that your emotional dysregulation is your responsibility. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't feel angry or upset. That's normal. It's a normal part of the human experience, and we should actually embrace it. But when we have a trigger, it is showing us where we need to love ourselves more deeply. So, for example, let's say you have somebody that is insecure about their appearance, right? And they meet somebody that looks the way they would like to look. And let's say there's a group environment. Let's say there's a guy that's maybe he used to be in good shape and he's let himself go a bit. He's lost a bit of his masculine shape. And there's a group of guys and he's friends with the guys there. And then let's say there's an attractive girl, or somewhat attractive, but he's attracted to her and he likes her. And she's way more attracted to the guy in the group that's got a physique that he would like to have. That could be triggering for him. So you might find that he starts to behave in slightly odd ways. Maybe he does things like, I don't know, points out flaws in this guy, or makes sort of like little digs at him, or tries to do things to make her find him less attractive. That's because he's insecure about himself. So if he was educated enough to identify, I'm triggered by this because actually I feel like I'm letting myself down. That's the root of that problem. I don't feel good enough. You don't feel good enough because you're abandoning yourself. You're choosing choices to eat badly and not take care of yourself, right? In this particular scenario, it's going to vary, right? And so your opportunity there is to recognize, this feels uncomfortable for me. Seeing this man in really good shape highlights to me that this is a part of myself that I miss, and this is something that I want to experience, being in good shape, feeling confident in my body. So you can either take digs at your friend and push away the person that you're essentially jealous of or envious of, which isn't going to serve you very well. Or you can think, right, I need to make some changes in my life. I need to choose better habits on a day-to-day basis, because you've ended up like that as a compound effect of day-to-day choices. Our emotions are a compass for us to lead us. So every time we experience an uncomfortable emotion, that's letting us know that doesn't feel good, so I should probably do less of that. Whereas in the moment, eating those bad foods can be instant gratification. But the compound effect leads to you feeling deeply uncomfortable with what you've done to your physical vehicle, your vessel for your human experience, which is a form of abandoning yourself. Sometimes it's not as black and white as that feels good, do more of that, that feels bad, do less of that. Sometimes it's about taking a step back and zooming out and realising it feels good, but I'm actually abandoning myself in that moment, because the long-term gratification, the investment into self, is really where I feel good. Truly feel good, not surface level good of like, it feels good to eat the donut. It does feel good to eat the donut. I'm not saying never eat the donut. Eat the donut, just don't eat them every day. Enjoy a little bit of instant gratification, but be dedicated and committed to your long-term compound effect of self-love.
Yeah, I love that. And I think what's interesting about this cycle is because the overeating that may happen in this scenario actually comes from the deep sense of being or feeling unloved in the first place anyway.
Yeah, and not loving yourself.
So that's where the trigger comes into play, because it's a surface level thing. But then that's where that deeper work is done, and it can be challenging to identify that, but the triggers are like the gateway open.
Totally agree. I think gateway is the right terminology, actually. It's like I always see it as like an invitation from source, from your higher self, whatever you want to call it. It's an invitation to look deeper at, why am I doing this to myself? Why am I choosing to do drugs every day? Why am I choosing to eat badly every day? It doesn't matter what it is. If you're betraying yourself, it's going to show up in your life. But when we become more conscious, it's the ability to recognize, I feel uncomfortable. It's not anybody else's fault. I'm going to take responsibility for how I feel, not you did something that made me angry, therefore it's your fault.
Yeah, I love that. I always say to clients as well, I mean, everything is a growth opportunity.
Absolutely.
Everything. And I think if you can see it that way, then you flip it on its head, because you're like, okay, where can I grow here?
100%.
Where can I grow? Where's the
100%.
opportunity?
I always
You know?
say that, and I know that you'll really resonate with this. I always say that those that take full accountability for their life are the most powerful people, because the minute you blame somebody else for how you feel or something that's going on in your life, you're giving away your power to rectify it. Because if you take 100% accountability for it, then the good news is that you're the person that can fix it. Whereas if you're saying that, oh, I can't make any money because of the economy, or I can't make any money because of the immigration, or I can't make any money because of the GDP, well, then you're making yourself helpless. Whereas same thing with the weight, or it doesn't matter what section of life you apply it to. The truth is that if you feel that you've taken 100% responsibility for it, then you have the power to change it.
Yeah.
So why on earth would anybody give away their power?
100%. It comes back to ownership.
100%.
Ownership. And it's for both. It's not like, I mean, I hear people talk a lot about, you know, for men, it's about taking ownership, but it's for women as well.
For humans.
For humans in general.
Yeah,
Take
absolutely. It
ownership
doesn't matter
over
what
it.
your gender, your religion, your sexual orientation, makes no difference.
Yeah.
I think the only time that doesn't truly apply is to small children.
Yeah. They're just
They're just in
beams
the
of light.
mix. Yeah, they're just in the mix. They're on the path.
Figuring it out,
Yeah.
you know, unfortunately being programmed by society.
Yeah,
Depending on-
we're all on the journey, hey?
Yeah, you know. But when we look at, so when we look at triggers, and then we look at those things that are causing the triggers deeply rooted within us, how does one, in your opinion, go about healing that, right? There's many ways we can look at it, right? But when someone gets triggered by something, let's say, okay, I'm going to take accountability. I'm going to take responsibility. I'm going to go deeper within myself. I'm going to ask those questions. Okay, now they're started to identify some emotions that they're feeling. They're becoming more aware of these things and how they play out in their daily life. How does one go about actually working with that to go on that journey of healing?
Yeah, I think that's part of the problem, right? Like, so I meet lots of people that are on the path of doing some kind of work on themselves, which is fantastic. And they get to a place where it's like, well, I've identified that I'm triggered, but I now don't know what to do with it. I don't really know what it means. And I think this is quite, it's a skill actually that is in this day and age. I think you can relate to this because you have the same skill. It's not that easy. A lot of people don't know what to do with the trigger. And it took me a long time, through, I don't know, I think I've been in therapy for about almost 20 years. I've done a variety of therapies. I've done huge amounts of plant medicine retreats and ceremonies, and I've done like EMDR therapy, talk therapy, and I've also studied a lot of different things. I've studied a lot of psychology and human behaviour and all sorts of things. And I think that when it comes down to the trigger, first of all, sometimes you can't do it on your own. Sometimes you do need someone that can point out your blind spots. It's a bit like driving. You need a wing mirror, you need a rear view mirror, you need windscreen wipers, you need help to keep the vision clear. So sometimes you do need to get a coach or a therapist. And I definitely think that if you're doing the work on yourself by yourself, what you can achieve in 10 years, you can probably achieve in a year with a coach or a therapist if there's someone that's tapped in, if they're dialed in and they know what they're doing. There's definitely a lot of people with PhDs that can't embody it for sure. But that's not a bad thing. I'm not knocking that. I think it's great because they can still help people that haven't got the PhD and that knowledge. But in terms of like actually working through the trigger, so I'm going to tell you a story to illustrate what I mean. So I had this ex-boyfriend and he sent me a really, really long voice note, and this voice note deeply triggered me. And for the first 2 hours, I did the normal human ego thing of like, he's a prick, he's this, he's that, projected it all onto him, it's all his fault, because to be fair, his behaviour was obscene. However, if it triggers you, it's yours. Apply yourself to your triggers. So what I decided to do after the first hour or two of, slating him in my mind was I thought, well, it did trigger you, Yaz, so you need to sit with it. And so I played back the voice note and I wrote out the sentences that triggered me. This voice note was about 12 minutes long. I didn't have to listen to more than a minute and 30 seconds for me to identify what the problem was. And then when I looked at my life, I could see it everywhere. And so in this voice note, he was praising other women a lot. And it was triggering for me because I felt like he valued them more than he valued me. So I didn't feel valued. And then when I looked at my life, I could see everywhere that I wasn't valuing myself, my time, my energy, my skill set, my resources. I remember actually it was a Virgo full moon. And so I did a full moon ceremony and I released so much. I wrote down, I released this blockage that I have about valuing myself. And I think it's something that's played out in my life in an ongoing basis. And I still have moments where I'm like, I'm not valuing myself correctly. But it was the ability to be able to sit down and identify the sentence that triggered me and then the words that triggered me. And I thought, well, why? Why does that upset me? And I was like, oh, because I don't feel valued by him. And so if you feel something about somebody else, it is a direct reflection of you. So if I really valued myself, I wouldn't be bothered whether or not he valued me. I wouldn't be with a man that didn't value me. It is that simple. So I think sometimes we overcomplicate it, and sometimes we also need someone to point us in the right direction. And I'd also like to point out that even though this was many years ago now, I still already had a lot of psychological understanding, and I'd been in therapy a very long time. So I wouldn't necessarily expect other people to necessarily be able to arrive at that. Some people for sure will be able to do that. And some people might not be able to.
Yeah, I totally get that. Yeah, when we talk about levels of consciousness, right, that's kind of what we're talking about here. It's the levels of awareness that can come from a variety of different things, like, meditation, breath work, you mentioned plant medicine as well, that kind of awakening process. How does one go about on a day-to-day if you were to have something simple to help them raise their levels of consciousness?
Yeah. This is great. This is great. I think triggers are the best thing. I think you can do all the plant medicine, you can do all the meditations, you can do all the breath work you want. These are great tools and great modalities, and I think all of them serve their place, and I've used all of the tools at different times, some of them more than others. But the one thing that I find that is the real direct door to it is your triggers. So I would say walk around with a little notebook, a little journal, and any time you feel even slightly dysregulated, even just a little smidge of like, that's fucking annoying, write it down. And when you have moments or time throughout the day, sit down and reflect on it and ask yourself why it upset you. So for example, let's say you're always really good with your time and a particular client always shows up late for you and they always pay you late. That's annoying for you. And you try and set boundaries and it doesn't work. Sit with yourself and ask yourself why. Is it because you feel disrespected? Okay, what's underneath that disrespect? Probably you don't feel valued. Don't feel valued? Okay, why? Where are you not valuing yourself? Because whatever you feel that person is showing you, there's a hole in your relationship with yourself, right? Because you know and I know that we live in a matrix, but the matrix it's not a place, it's your mind. And so planet Earth is where we come to live out this human experience. And so if it's being reflected back to you, whether it's in your relationship with money, your relationship with food, your relationship with your body, your relationship with your mother, it doesn't matter. It is showing you something about your relationship with self. That is always the case. It's not always a direct translation. So, for example, if I look at somebody and I think that they're lazy, maybe they actually are lazy. Maybe I'm not seeing that I'm lazy with that same thing. Maybe I think that they're fat because they're lazy. I might not be fat because I'm lazy, but maybe there's laziness somewhere else in my life. So it's not always a direct translation, but it's there. Yeah,
that's so true. Like, as in your financial relationship with money could be tied to your health,
absolutely,
how you feel, your mind, all of it's related. It's all one. You mentioned a couple of things right around relationships. I want to dive into a little bit of that.
Yeah, let's go. I love this stuff. Yeah.
Relationships, because this is, that's where you'll get triggered the most, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
In some relationships,
spouses, parents, children,
all of them. So
siblings as well is a really interesting one, I think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and they're all slightly different because obviously the dynamic is different between them as well. But before we dive into that, let's reference the divine masculine and the divine feminine, right? These terms, these lingo, right? They're quite spiritual terms. So like, what does the divine masculine mean to you, and what does the divine feminine mean to you? And then we'll keep it as basic as we possibly can, and then we'll build on it from there.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, let's start basic and define it. So I think it's really important to reference that we all have both within us. It doesn't matter if you're gay, straight, man, woman, trans, makes no difference. Every single human being on the planet has a masculine and a feminine container within themselves in terms of energy. And so the way that we would attribute that would be things like earning money and providing for yourself is a masculine energy. Cooking, baking, creating, flowing is a feminine energy. So all of the things that we experience in life have a more dominant masculine energy or a more feminine dominant energy to it. And some things are a little bit more in the middle or have a little bit more of a tonality of one, right? And so when I think about the divine masculine, it's the opposite of the wounded masculine. So as in everything has duality. So for example, if we think about something like anger as an emotion, well, anger in itself is not a toxic emotion. It's something we all feel at certain points. And it's actually a part of ourselves because it's a primary and a secondary emotion. So when one expresses anger, it can either be healthy, which would be divine, or it can be toxic, which would be wounded. Same with feminine energies, right? So, for example, if we're expressing nurture, which is a more feminine energy, not that masculines can't be nurturing, but for the sake of the concept, nurture, you know, if one is nurturing from the place of people pleasing, that would be wounded feminine energy. If one is nurturing from a place of love, that would be divine feminine.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a really good way to describe it, because these terms can get very up in the air very fast.
Oh, yeah.
So it's interesting. And yeah, when it comes to like the wounded masculine, I think that's where the majority of men have been for the last number of years. And I think that's why there's this big rise in masculinity when it comes to, you know, like working harder, producing, becoming more, you know, consistent, disciplined, focused, all these different things. But that has been an era that I think we're slowly moving out of, because that has been helping men to really rise in a way that is healthy for them. But we also need to understand that to be able to become fully divine as a masculine man, we must cultivate the feminine energy within ourselves as well.
Absolutely.
You know? Because if you're somebody if you're a man specifically and you're working hard and it's like you're in that grind mode and you're in production mode, that's great. But if it's coming from a place of fear, doubt, insecurity and hate, self-hatred, then that's not divinity. It's not the divine masculine. It's a wounded energy.
Absolutely.
Right? And you can't lead people that way, unfortunately.
Well, you can, but you'll lead them to more toxicity.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, and hence why we see a lot of the things that are going on today.
Yeah.
You know, and I think wounded masculine energy comes from a place of forcing.
Yeah,
absolutely. You see a lot of people trying to force things, so they'll chuck money at a problem. It's like, you will do this because I'm going to pay you. And then you see other people that feeds into other people's insecurity because they've got a fear of lack, so they'll take the money and do things that betray themselves.
Yeah.
You see a lot of that at the moment with the whole like OnlyFans situation, you know. Women get this sort of label, you know, it's sort of like they're really not very nice words used in their direction, but actually they're just playing the game that men created. You guys said that you like sex, you like boobs, you like watching it, so we're going to exchange it for money. And it's also the oldest profession on the planet, essentially, other than perhaps midwifery and undertakers.
Very true.
So
yeah, it's the men that feed us.
100%, because there's no supply without demand for anything. That's just a rule of business. That's just a law of the universe in a capitalist society. So I agree with you. You know, we've come from this, and also you think about times like the Industrial Revolution and stuff like that. It required hard work. Yeah, it really did. Absolutely. You know, we move as a collective for sure. You know, there's a collective consciousness and there's your individual role. And so I think that we also have this period of time now. It's actually very interesting. I notice this with women a lot, where if we think about the sanctity of marriage, until very recently, in the grand scheme of things, for maybe, 50, 60 years, depending upon the country you're in, marriage was a more economical arrangement. And women were dependent upon men for money. You couldn't leave your husband because unless you had a father or a brother or somebody else to go to, which would be very rare, you're not going to eat, so you can't leave. So if he's raping you, abusing you, or cheating on you, you have to part with it. And now, I was reading this survey recently where it said the happiest group of people at the moment are women in their sort of 30s to 40s that are single,
Interesting.
which I think is threatening to society. But I understand why, because if we look at things like marriage, it's much more likely that a woman will leave the marriage before the man will, because
I think there's actually stats to back that up as well. That most,
there are.
divorces are
Yeah.
initiated by women.
I'm always a bit like hestant with stats because I just think, where do people get this information from? But yes, there are stats to back this up. I think if you look at divorce stats in America, it shows that most of them, a lot of it is incited by women more so. And obviously, if you look at divorce stats at the moment, first marriages are sitting around, depending upon the country, you look at about around 50 to 55% first marriage. Second marriage is above 60%. Third marriage is late 60s to above 70%. Because I think that now we get to a stage where people's standards change. Now you don't have to put up with things because women can earn their own money. Now, the pay gap, according to Dr. Gottman, the pay gap is actually not improved that much. If you go back a few years, according to their research, women used to earn 79 cents for every dollar that a man earned, and now it's only 81 cents. But I think things like social media can paint a picture where you see more women that are millionaires or they've earned a lot of money in their own right. But if you just look at the masses, if you zoom out and you look at the masses, not the glamorized parts of life, the actual pay gap hasn't necessarily shifted that much, even though it might look like it on the surface in some ways. And I think that we've got this group of women that are really in a wounded masculine energy of, and I can resonate, I can really understand it, as a woman, would I stay with a man that's abusive to me? Absolutely not. I don't have to, because I can earn my own money. But it then puts me in a position where I have to go out and work hard to earn my money, or unless you're one of those people that are in the hack and you understand that you can just manifest money out of nowhere,
Yeah.
But then you also find women that will find a man and be with him because of the financial security. I'm not saying this is right or wrong. I'm just saying that we have different motivations in life, because I think money is a really interesting relationship that all of us have. We all have a relationship with money. Some of us are really good at receiving it, but we can't keep it. Some of us aren't so good at receiving it, but when we do, we can't let go of it. And all of these things come from a scarcity or a lack mindset, and we're all working with that to some degree or another. And then, if we look at men, as a man, if you want to have your pick of the bunch, if you want to have access to the best women on the planet to raise your children, most of the time you have to have a lot of money. And in the masculine world, it is a man's world. A lot of men compete with finances and materialism. But the thing is that, I said this to you a moment ago, we live on an abundant plane and abundance is here for us to experience and enjoy, absolutely. But the moment you find yourself attached to materialism and you're using it to define your worth, as in, look at me, I've got this car, I've got that car, I've got this house, I've got this many women that want me. Again, that's coming from a scarcity mindset, it's coming from a lack mindset. You don't feel good enough, because if you really felt good enough, you could relinquish all of your things.
Yeah, it's very interesting how the ego kind of takes over in that direction. I think that's why when we talk about the divine masculine, is that it's more about integrating this side of yourself that is driven by something bigger than you, rather than something that is forced by insecurity.
Absolutely.
So it's like, instead of building the business just because you're trying to just build something for the validation that comes from it, or so you can have all this access and maybe sleep with all these women type of thing, why not go inwards within yourself, heal those parts of yourself, love yourself unconditionally, so that when you show up and you do build, it's from a place of excitement, purpose, passion, mission, and by universal law, you will bring a woman into your life that can support that in a very healthy way. And
Absolutely.
I think really that's what most men want. They don't, and I think, most men, right? I'd speak for generally most men, not everybody, wants a woman that will just be in their life, support them, and they can get along with them, and it's amazing, and they're there support them in each way, whether that's business or just anything, and they can just
be there for them.
They can just focus on their thing that they want to build, right? Bringing out that childlike essence of just building something. I think, at least for me, that's what excites me the most. And I think it's the same for women. A woman doesn't want to go off and sleep with all of these different men and be in her masculine all the time. She wants the man to be able to provide for her.
Absolutely.
So we both want the same things. It's just, for some reason,
it's getting lost in translation.
we just get lost. We get lost along the way.
Because the ego's weak, the ego's fragile. There's this saying, isn't there, that women are the gatekeepers to sex and men are the gatekeepers to commitment, and that makes perfect sense when you start to understand the duality of masculine and feminine energy. And I think what you're talking about is very true, because what I notice when I have male clients and I speak to them, what I really notice is that a lot of them want a peaceful woman. They want a woman to bring peace into their life.
Yep, 100%.
Because I feel like it is a masculine world, and men go out into the world to compete. And when they come home at the end of the day, they want a space where, it's not easy to express your emotions out there. It's really not.
Yeah, it's not the place.
And
really.
there's a lot of mental games and strategy going on. And if you have a woman that's tapped in tune, smart, intelligent, she can cook you some good food and give you a little head massage and have deeply connected sex when you come home at the end of the day, that recharges you and refuels you to go out the next day and go and not fight for your family, but you know what I mean?
But
energetically,
yeah, 100%, yeah.
Create a space where you're receiving lots of money. And this is why it's so important that it's like you're a team, you're a unit. It's not his money and her cooking. It's, as a team, this is what you build. It's like you need the divine feminine, you need the divine masculine to create a unit that has a stable foundation that you can raise humans in, that you can create an environment that is loving, so that, God forbid, if any of your family members need a space to be safe, your loving family unit is a place that they can come and recharge to. And so I noticed that a lot of men want women to bring them peace. But a woman first has to be peaceful in herself before she can give peace to somebody else. And it's the same for men, right?
Yeah, it goes both ways.
Yeah, a man can't provide if he can't provide for himself first. How can you provide for another if you can't provide for yourself first?
But that's also emotionally, though, as well.
100%. Yeah, because I think that one of the things that's missing for a lot of men is, let's talk about crying, right? I love
Sure.
This is such an easy thing to explain. Society has such misleading and uneducated stances on things that are just normal. So, like, for example, when we cry, that's because our nervous system is dysregulated. So, I'm sure we've all had the experience. You get so excited about something that you cry. You feel so much love about something or someone that you cry. Crying isn't always about sadness, and it's certainly not weakness. For me personally, I find that a man that can express his emotions, I'm not saying cry all day, every day, but when you can express your emotions and go against the grain of what society thinks, that brainwashing, I find you more strong. I find you more attractive as a human being, whether it be romantic or otherwise, because you feel so centered and authentic in who you are that you don't care what anybody thinks. And so when we cry, we're made up of 70% water, as many of us know from just science. And so when our nervous system is dysregulated, it needs to rebalance. So sometimes that could be a burst of sometimes it could be a burst of crying, sometimes it's laughter.
Yeah.
And that's just your nervous system regulating itself. It doesn't mean you're weak.
100%.
To believe that you're weak because you cried of a normal bodily function, that's like believing there's something wrong with you because you took a wee. Like, come on.
I think that comes from societal programming
Absolutely,
as well.
but that's consciousness, right?
Exactly.
Looking at the programming and questioning it and being like, how can that even make sense?
Yeah.
Why would I follow what I've been told? It actually doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and the big thing with that as well, which is, I think men need other men to be able to do that around, because that's where it starts.
100%.
Because if a man doesn't have another man that he can actually express emotions with in a healthy way, where it's like you're holding that space in your masculine frame for another man who's going through something, I think that's very important for men to have, because then that allows them to show up in a more powerful way when it comes to expressing emotions with their woman.
Absolutely.
Which is why the majority of the men who I work with, for example, like a lot of the time, if there's any emotional release, I just hold that space for them. And they've
100%.
now accepted themselves in a way that they've never been able to do before. And they feel like, okay, this is actually not wrong. It's actually normal for me to be like this and to process through this and actually become stronger because of it. They can manage their emotions because of it as well. And something I want to mention there, which is key of what you mentioned, which is where the crying is coming from, right? So it's not crying all day, every day, because that's coming from an energy of victimhood almost, right?
Can be.
Well,
sometimes, because of the stuff that we're talking about, it can just be built up release that needs to happen.
That's very true. That's very true. It can come from that too. So I think getting into almost a rhythm of like, find your way of expression. Some people do it through fighting. Some people do it through, crying, laughing, spending time with friends, doing things that are just allowing you to drop out of this game that we play in our heads a lot of times, especially as men. We get caught up in our minds and everything. Very logical thinkers.
Yeah, and like lots of boxes, fitting into boxes.
Yeah. It has to be like this and then this. And that's the way I make sense of things.
Yeah, and if it's not this, then it's wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And then that's where the confusion comes in. You start
Yeah.
overthinking, and anxiety comes from that. It's like, yeah, it's really interesting. But there's one thing on this that I have it written down here, and I want to touch on it because it's going to be really important. If when it comes to the divine masculine, divine feminine, how would you? We actually touched on that. What are some of the core qualities of a divine masculine that you would see in terms of like if you were attracted to a divine masculine?
Yeah.
What are some of the qualities you're looking for?
Also known as an alpha. I think we have
That's
this.
another way to look at it.
You know, I think a lot of people. There's a lot of people that think that some wounded masculine traits is masculinity, and I beg to differ, because let's say an alpha man might have a lot of women available to him, but an alpha man wouldn't just give his energy away casually because he values himself. Because being an alpha or a divine, masculine or feminine, is truly about having a divine connection to self, which means you value yourself, you value your time, you value your energy, you value your resource, you value your words, your mindset, everything. You value your body, you value your health. So it's seeing somebody embody self-love, and therefore it's easy to give it to others because you exude it. So a divine masculine, he's careful with his time and his energy. He's definitely not sleeping around. He is mindful of what he puts in his body, what he eats, what he consumes, both conversationally, what he consumes on the internet, etc. I wouldn't think of a divine masculine as someone that is watching porn or following a lot of Instagram models or any of that kind of stuff. You know, it's quite low frequency behaviour that fragments the mind, does damage to the brain, does damage to the genitals and the mind-body connection. None of that
Perspective
stuff.
on women as well changes a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. A divine masculine values all feminines around him, like all women, you know?
Yeah.
Like I think of you as very much a divine masculine, and when I'm with you, when I'm in your company, you treat me as if I'm a queen. You would do anything to protect me. You would provide anything that I need to make sure I'm comfortable. You would, you know, make sure I'm okay. You take care of me. You know, not because you've got any agenda, but that's because you take your role as a masculine seriously. You would do the same for your sister. You would do the same for a female friend. It's normal. And so what else I see in a divine masculine is literally leaning into divinity, into connection with themselves, with God. It doesn't matter if you're religious or not. It's your connection to yourself and everything around you. It's the way that you carry yourself. You know, you'd be polite to people. You'd be kind to people, but not passive. Divine masculine is not passive.
Yeah,
if there's something that you see going on that you don't like, that is aggressive, not to involve yourself in other people's business too much, hey? But, you know, let's say you see somebody abusing a homeless man. A divine masculine would not be able to sit there and watch that unless it meant that it would be putting somebody that he loves in danger. You know, that might be different. You have to weigh up the scenario, you know?
Yeah,
but just as an
situational.
example, a divine masculine is not passive. They're not a people pleaser.
Yeah, I think that's where the big gray area is like, okay, well, what we're describing here can very much be perceived as someone who is quiet and tame, doesn't
Absolutely
really,
not.
but
No,
it's
no,
not
no,
like
no.
that. It has the
No.
capacity to do harm if
Oh,
necessary,
absolutely.
if measures
Oh, yeah.
present themselves.
Divine masculine can absolutely have the capacity to kill.
Yeah.
I would like to think that this is an example that I give that some people might like. If I'm in bed with my husband and he's a divine masculine, if somebody breaks into the house, I don't need to worry too much. He's going to go
He's
and
not
take
asking
care
you
of
to
it.
go downstairs.
Absolutely not. He's not like, babe, I think there's someone in the house. He'd be like, babe, I'm just going to lock you in the bedroom, but I'm just going to go take care of some stuff right now. I'll be back in a bit.
Yeah.
Cool. It's the same thing for me. It's like, if he has some sort of problem when he comes home, I'm going to be creative for it. You're hungry? Okay, I'm going to make you some food. You need to talk about something? Okay, I'm all ears. Do you want my input or do you just need me to listen to you? You know, you're stressed? Okay, let's do something playful together. I'm going to create for you.
Yeah, I love
I'm going to be in that flow for you, so that when you come home from a hard day in the masculine world, I'm going to bring you into our divine environment, the home that I've created, so that you're going to come into a nice, loving, warm environment where you can relax and be yourself, and you can let your guard down now. This is a safe space for you, just like you're keeping it safe for me, but in the masculine way.
Yeah.
We play the role, so we create that divine foundation. But divine masculine, yeah, it's It's a strong, stable, self-secured man that is in touch with his emotions, whether that be the harder ones, the more aggressive ones, or the more loving and soft ones. Divine masculine can lean into his divine feminine, because a divine masculine, you know, if you think about, if you were to provide for a woman, right? We often talk about that in the terms of money and home. All true. Great, fantastic stuff. But to provide emotional safety for a woman means that you need to be able to listen to her and not try and control her emotions and just fix her problems. Sometimes she needs to go through the process, so not being intimidated or scared by the fact that she feels so much. And sometimes we feel stuff that's not even rational or reasonable, and sometimes we just need you to hear it.
Just listen.
Yeah. And to not be freaked out about it or be like, okay, well, this problem needs to be solved. It's like, actually, no, sometimes it's like we know what we need to do to solve our problem. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes we do need you to solve the problem. Sometimes we just need to actually just vent to you. Sometimes we need to vent to our girlfriends. You know, it depends on the situation. But part of being a divine masculine is a man that can receive criticism and feedback as well. Not that I'm big on criticizing your partner too much, but you know, if you can't receive criticism, then you're going to stunt your growth, because our growth is in direct correlation to how much truth you can receive about yourself. And so I think that being a divine masculine is also about being able to hold that space comfortably, you know, like I've cried in your presence when we didn't even know each other that well, and the way you just sat with me, you just held my hand and you were just like, I so understand where you're coming from, and that was it. And it was just like, and then I stopped crying and it was fine, we moved on to the next thing. And it's just, that is divinity is being able to lean into the totality of the human experience. That doesn't mean avoiding the uncomfortable emotions. It means leaning into them just as much as you lean into your pleasure. And when you really get to the place of divinity, leaning into your challenging emotions actually feels just as good as the pleasurable ones.
That was really good. Yeah,
Thank
that
you.
was nice. Yeah. So how, like, let's say a man he's listening to this now and he's like, okay, he's asking the questions within himself and he's like, okay, am I a divine masculine? Am I stepping into this? Like, what do I need to do? Who do I need to be? How do I go on that journey of becoming more of that? You know?
That's a really good question. Triggers is a great one. Start with the triggers. Walk around with a journal, write down your triggers, and sit with them and ask yourself questions. Ask yourself and be honest with yourself. I think it's hard to be honest with ourselves sometimes. You know, it's like sometimes when you're on this journey, you realize, oh my God, I've built a multi-million-dollar company from a place of fear. So how are we going to course correct that? Well, you're already in a bit of a web there. So I would just start with being present. So in your day-to-day, when you snap at your kids, when you snap at your wife, and you know that you've snapped, you might feel a bit guilty about it. Do you go back and say sorry? Or do you just move on with it because they haven't pulled you on it? Because one thing that I think is really important to notice as a man, right? When you shout at a woman and she goes quiet, that's not her being submissive, that's fear.
Yeah.
That's a really big wake-up call for a lot of guys. They think, oh, it's submission, I'm in control. No, that's your wounded masculine. She's being submissive to you because you're physically stronger than her and she's now scared of you. That's the reality of the situation. So look at your micro behaviors. You snap at the kids unnecessarily because you're annoyed. Maybe the stock market went down and your stock's tanked. And then your son wanted to play with you and you're like, not now, it's not the time. And you reject him. He made a bid for connection for you. In that moment, when you realize that, go and sit with your son, hold him and say to him, I'm so sorry, I know you came to me earlier and you wanted to play and I snapped at you and I shouldn't have done that. You know, I was angry and not because of you and not with you and I shouldn't have done that. Take responsibility, take ownership, teach your son how to be a man. And say, I'm sorry. What would you like to do right now? I've got some time, I'd love to spend it with you. Go to your wife and say, I'm so sorry, honey, that I snapped at you earlier. I shouldn't have. I wasn't mad at you and I'm sorry that I took out my anger and my frustrations on you. When you do that, that builds connection and trust. This is how we repair. When you can take ownership of your behavior in a way that you are not waiting for somebody to come to you, people will respect you more. And even if you can do this as a boss, people will be queuing up to work for you.
Yeah.
Because this is divinity and this is
Leadership
love.
as well, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's
because
proper leadership.
the reality is that, you know, when you do work like you and I, and we hold up mirrors for people and we point out blind spots for them, I don't ever ask my clients to do anything that I haven't already done, and I know that you don't.
100%.
And, you know, if I've done something that I am not proud of, I'm not saying I do it every time. I don't get it right every time.
Yeah, nobody
But
does.
I will really try to be like, I shouldn't have done that. Let me say something to that person. You know, and sometimes I think about it and I forget. That's not good. But I really try to be like, you know what? I'm sorry that I could have conducted myself better in that situation. And I should have, and I know better for next time, and I'm sorry that I didn't then. And, you know, taking ownership for how we express our more challenging emotions. And not only that, but this has a ripple effect, right? Like when you conduct yourself like that, your children are going to learn how to conduct themselves like that. And then when they do, their friends do. And your wife will then start doing it back to you. And guess what? Your relationship's going to meet a whole new level of intimacy.
Yeah.
The ripple effect is powerful.
It really is. Really is. Cause and effect almost as well, right? You're
Absolutely,
playing with universal forces here. So that's from the man's perspective, right? The man is cultivating this divinity within themselves, and he's bringing awareness to these different things. From a woman's perspective, how does she cultivate more of that divine femininity? Because I think you mentioned OnlyFans earlier, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's its own thing entirely, right? And again, that's fueled by men, but it's also, women are also responsible for that as well. You know, it's like this balance that's within. So like, how do women start to cultivate more of their divinity to attract the divine masculine so they can both interlink and ascend into greatness?
Okay. I'm going to go on 2 tangents here.
Cool.
So bear with me. Let's start with the OnlyFans thing as an example. We talk about masculine energy as if it's the leader, and it is. As in, if we go out for dinner, I want you to pick the restaurant or give me 2 choices and make it easy for me.
You're not splitting the bill?
Absolutely not. Never. What is that? And just like if you come to my house, I don't expect you to cook your own food. You know? So we're just going to base this discussion for the sake of it on that humanity is programmed to focus on the vagina, right? And I can go into more detail about this another time, but for the sake of this explanation, we're just going to focus on the fact that we are focused on the vagina. It's where life comes from, and everything in the world is focused on the vagina. You look at flowers, they all look like vaginas. So men, not all men, but a lot of men, most men will chase being inside the vagina. And so women have that. When you make it so easily accessible, men don't have to do anything to get what they are wired to chase or pursue. Maybe not chase. I don't like the word chase. The idea that you're chasing something means that it's running away from you. And I don't believe that men should be chasing women or women should be chasing men. That's an unhealthy wound dynamic. Yeah. But that's another
But that's the
side
desire
note.
The desire to reproduce as well.
Absolutely,
just our
exactly.
primal instincts.
We are wired to do that.
Yeah.
So if women keep the bar low and OnlyFans and things like this. And by the way, this is not a dig at anybody doing that. I'm not looking down on anybody or anything like this. I'm talking about this from a factual, spiritual, energetic perspective. You know, there's no shade being thrown on anybody here. But if the bar to access is low, then men don't have to improve, do they? Whereas if you go back in time, I remember my grandfather, and he was born in, I think he was born in like 1929. And he said to me that when he was growing up, you know, if you saw a flash of a woman's ankle, that was exciting. Because everybody was in like long skirts and blouses and stuff. So it's quite, you know, everything was quite loose fitting. So there wasn't so much on show. And you had to work hard. You knew that the chances were you weren't going to sleep with your woman until you were either married or at the very least engaged, you know, and then it would kind of be in secret. So you had to work harder. You had to court a woman, and you had to get rejected. Whereas nowadays, people can be like keyboard warriors. Like, people say things to you online they wouldn't dare say to your face.
That's wild.
And also, you know, it minimizes the fear of rejection in a way because you can just send a message. Now, this is just a sort of a factor of the way society is evolving. But my point is more that women actually set the bar. So all of this like casual sex and being like easily available, which can I point out is also part of the cycle. It comes from needing to soothe the wounded part of the ego that doesn't feel wanted. And women for centuries, we've been used and abused, raped, and that energy lingers. And there's still a lot of this stuff going on. Like, it's horrendous. And so we're carrying that inside us, and it gets passed down generationally. And you can look at it from a psychological factor, i.e., if your mum is insecure, then the way she makes her decisions around men and what you learn as a woman, you're going to take that on board unless you are able to learn what that is, embody it, and change it. So if your mum's got low self-worth, chances are you're going to see a lot of that in her behaviour and what she accepts from men. And so you're going to learn that, even if it's your own biological father. It doesn't, just because it's your parents that have stayed together doesn't make it any better. You're still going to learn that behaviour. Unless you develop the consciousness to understand what that behaviour is, where it comes from, and heal that wound so you don't pass it on to your children. This is psychological fact. This is also genetic and energetic fact.
Yeah.
So where we have a lot of women that have got low self-esteem and low self-worth, and that will be triggering for some people to hear, and I'm so sorry that it's triggering, but come sit with me, let's do the work on healing that, because I've been there. I understand what it is to have low self-worth and low self-esteem. I've accepted awful behaviour from lots of people in my life. And we do the work so that we invite people into our lives that will love us and treat us, because everybody wants to be loved. But, sometimes I get messages from people and they're like, I'm not treated of my worth, I'm not treated of my value. And it's like, you get your standard, you get what you're willing to accept. So if you're willing to accept people treating you badly, that's what you'll get. If you're willing to accept, an exchange of services as a form of your relationship, like you'll be with a rich man so that he takes care of you, and in return he gets to have a young, beautiful woman, or whatever your exchange of agreement is. Again, no shade, but that's what you'll get. So when we look at the divine feminine, how can the divine feminine embody more of this? Holding higher standards for yourself and surrendering, like choosing men that you feel safe enough to surrender to. This has been a big journey for me personally, I've got a father and a stepfather, neither of which have done right by me in the slightest, but also I'm so grateful for those experiences, because I wouldn't be who I am today without them. So everything, I really believe everything's working out perfectly exactly as it should, and I'm so grateful for the abuse and the neglect that I've experienced my whole life. But it's been a journey to get to a place where I love myself, if truth be told. It's been a really, really, really long journey. And as a woman, you have to be educated enough in terms of behaviour to understand that there are men that you can surrender to safely because they will keep you safe. But it comes down to an education of being able to recognise as what people call red flags. Be like, and I notice that a lot of people lack this skill set to varying degrees. Some people are better at it than others. But to notice that, they've done that before, and I've seen them do that with somebody else, so they're probably not somebody I can surrender to. So I think there's an element of education for women, but also learning to be able to take care of your own masculine container. How well do you take care of yourself? One thing that I think I see a lot of women do is abuse their body. I see a lot of women starving themselves because they feel that they're too fat. Society tells you need to look a certain way. I've been there. I understand. I totally get it. Sometimes I still have those moments. It's not like you're ever free of that. This is part of the human journey, learning to be comfortable with yourself, particularly as a woman, right? Because your physique changes so much before you have children after you have children, etc. Your body as a woman, it goes through so many changes, way more than men. That alone in itself is a big journey that we have to deal with. And then also you throw in the menstrual cycle on top of that. We're only normal for 12 weeks of the year.
I remember you mentioned that too.
Yeah.
That's pretty wild. Yeah.
So, when I say normal, I mean chemically balanced.
Chemically
as in we haven't got something that's making us extra horny or extra reactive or extra emotional. The rest of the time there's always something extra going on. And so that makes it harder. You know, even sometimes I speak to some of my friends that are like really calm, easygoing people, and I'm like, how are you a few days before your period? They're like, oh, I've got no patience, extra irritable, very snappy. I'm like, really? I can hardly imagine you like that, you know?
Different human.
And so as a woman, leaning into your divinity is learning to really love yourself, have strong boundaries and standards, and learning which men to give yourself to, whether that be sexually or otherwise. I'm talking energetically.
Yeah.
How you allow your investment. And also, I don't want to make this too black and white, but, you know, don't have casual sex. Straight up, just don't have casual sex. Like, casual sex is not good for you. You know, that's a blanket statement, but I can back that up.
That solves a lot of problems.
100%, because the reality is that if you're giving yourself away sexually, then people don't have to do anything to earn you. And not only that, but if you love your body and it's divine and you want to take care of it, why would you just let anybody inside it?
And for men as well, for them to recognize the divine feminine, because if they're on that journey of spiritual growth and self-mastery, right, they got to be able to spot these divine women who are working on
100%.
themselves. And that's like a clear tell sign. If you go out on a date and you're 30 minutes into the date, you're already going home with her. Okay, that's a clear tell sign.
She's not going to be your wife.
Probably not going to be your wife.
Yeah, I don't want to say
know what I mean?
absolute blanket.
But of course,
because
there's
there are going to be
nuances.
some anomalies there for sure.
Absolutely,
for
because
sure.
it can actually be a thing where it's like it's an instant connection and it's like
And you
something
both
that's
feel
really
it and you
powerful
both know it.
and it's
Yeah.
very obvious. So there's nuances to all of this. There's no black and white.
For sure, because you can also
Yeah.
sometimes tell when you meet a woman that maybe she hasn't been sexually active with other people. Because I think all men, they want a woman that's not sexually active. They want her to be sexual for them.
Yeah.
And I think all women want a bad boy to be good for them. You
Good,
know?
yeah. Men want a good girl who's bad for them.
Yeah,
like you said.
absolutely.
Yeah. It's so fascinating. So what I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on is how does a man go about finding out how many men this woman has maybe slept with, if that's something he's like curious about? Because I know that that's very common for a lot of guys, but he's energetically, he can feel that this woman is like, okay, there's a good energy with her. She takes care of herself. She loves herself. But I'm just still getting to know her. So what does that look like in terms of how does he approach that? Is it like an outright question of like, what's your body count, where a lot of people would say that? Or how would you navigate that? And how would you respond when someone asks you that, for example?
Well, mine's low, so I don't have a problem answering that. And I'm also an open book, as you know, but I'm also quite unusual. I think the way I am is that common. And also, to be honest with you, I think we all have a history and we all have a past. I don't necessarily think it's wise to judge someone on their past. You know, sometimes I meet men that 5 years ago I wouldn't have even considered them, but who they are today, that past has contributed to who they are today. So I think one of the most important reflections on things like body count is, why is it important to you, first of all?
Do you think it's an ego thing?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the thing.
And I think it depends, right? Because let's say someone was a bit promiscuous from 21 to 23 or 24, and then from the ages of 27 to wherever they're at now in their life, they have completely changed the way that they are and they conduct themselves in a completely different way and they've gone through lots of awakenings. Then why does it matter? So I think you want to look at what's in front of you before you ask about things like body count. Like, what value are you placing on that information? Especially, you know, once you start getting into your 30s and your 40s, I mean, we've all got a history, come on.
Yeah, a lot of
you
that
know?
goes, yeah.
Yeah, you know?
Yeah, I can
So I
imagine.
think really, I would be encouraging you to look at what is it that you're looking for that data to tell you? So if you're looking to see, like, is it promiscuity, is it self-value, is it what is it you're trying to gauge from
That's
asking
it.
that question?
But there's a psychological factor to this that men have, because I've gone deep into this because this was a fascinating topic.
Yeah.
Because many questions I was getting was around this. There's a psychological factor that causes men to get a sense of not insecurity, but just fear around investing time and energy into a certain woman who has a past like that, because it's like this primal instinct that if I invest my resources here, it's a risky bet because of the history, and they're basing it off the history. Yes, she may be at a place now where it's different, but if the history is there before, it's like now I'm at a sense of like, okay, what if I invest my resources here and it's like not the best outcome comes from that? That's where that comes into play. So
That's also a desire to control, though, which comes from insecurity.
It's interesting.
Because you can know that someone slept with maybe only one person. That could also be risky because maybe they've missed out on years of play.
Yeah.
So it depends how
goes
you
both ways.
want to value it.
Yeah.
So I understand what you're saying and the psychological point of view. That makes sense to me, and I can understand why men value that, but I would say women value it too.
Yeah.
Listen, there's something that, you know,
'Cause,
nobody
it
wants
goes both
access.
ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Nobody wants something that everybody has access to. Nobody wants the village bicycle. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean? I don't mean that rudely, but that's the truth.
Yeah.
So I think promiscuity is undesirable in general for anybody that's serious, anybody that seriously wants to invest into a partner. Promiscuity in general is undesirable.
Yeah,
You know, for
even,
me
like, for men as
personally,
well.
a man that's
Yeah.
just given his energy out to like any woman that comes his way, and he's got no sense of like, oh, she's probably not very good for me or whatever. That's not attractive to me at all.
Yeah.
You know, a man that's incredibly promiscuous, I would never.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's a narrative for young guys as well, especially with the kind of online dating space. Like there's a message out there that I definitely don't agree with, where it's like your value as a man is dictated by the amount of women that you sleep with. That's kind of like the blanket statement.
That's so
Now,
scary and dangerous.
it
and
is.
sad. That's so sad.
It is, and to a degree, for a guy who's understanding more about himself and getting better at speaking with women, spending time with women, I think that there's a window for that. But if that continues throughout your life, then that's where you're going down a path of just trying to fill a void within yourself. That's where deeper work is required, you know. But it's very interesting, and I think that's starting to shift, because I talk about this in my content all the time, the way of the modern master. And this is like the fine balance between the divine masculine and feminine within that identity. But to be able to truly honor the feminine and honor that feminine within yourself, as well as the masculine, comes from respect.
Respect of self and others.
Exactly.
And if you respect other women, and so for example, if you know that there's a woman that's like emotionally weak, and maybe she has sex with lots of different men to sort of soothe herself and feel wanted, which is quite common. If you can see that and you take advantage of that, you're on the spectrum of predatorial. So again, you know, one of the things that I also, if you're in a club or something at the end of the night and you see lots of drunk people and men like on the prowl to take a woman home, you're on the predatorial spectrum there. You know, that's not healthy behaviour. It's not respectful to yourself, and it's not respectful to others.
Yeah.
And I think
your
that,
mother and your sister as well, the women in your life.
The way that that's how I see it. Like if you respect the divine feminine, you should be treating every woman you come into contact with the way that you'd want your sister to be treated, or your mother to be treated, or your daughter to be treated. If you're not operating like that, then you have work to do. And the same goes for women.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I'm not ever, you know, holding one more accountable than the other at all. I don't like that. I don't like this narrative of all men are like this or all women are like this. No. You get what you're willing to accept and a reflection of what you're putting out there. So if you believe that all women are gold diggers, guess what? You're going to meet all the women that are gold diggers, or what you perceive to be a gold digger. And if you believe that all men are after one thing, you are going to get all the men that you perceive to be only after one thing. And so I think, you know, we have to take responsibility for our experiences a lot more than people do, rather than putting the ownership on men or women.
Yeah, it's neither one. It's a combination of
absolutely.
both. Yeah, both of them rise.
But so, like, bring it back to your question about the body count, so to speak. I mean, I think you can ask people, and you can gauge whether or not their answer is honest. But to be honest with you, you know, if someone asked me that, I would actually, because I'm not ashamed of my answer at all, but I would ask, you know, why do you want to know? For me, it would actually flag a little bit if a guy asked me that.
Yeah, I hear that.
And so I think that if someone's trying to acquire data about how valuable is this situation for me to invest in, you want to look at things like, how does she carry herself? How does she dress? How does she interact with other men in front of you? How does she interact with men online? What's her Instagram like? You know, so for example, like we live in Bali, right? And so I'm in a bikini a lot of the time. But let's say I'm in a bikini in my gym. When I walk around my gym, even though it's very acceptable to walk around in a bikini anywhere you are in Bali, you can be walking down the street here in a bikini. No one bats an eyelid because there's beaches everywhere and people are surfing. But I'll always walk around my gym with a sarong on. And, you know, on my Instagram, absolutely, there are images of me in my bikini. but they're not everywhere, and I'm not taking pictures in a bikini purposely to post a picture of my body. It just so happens that there's a picture of me at the beach with my friends, so I happen to be in a bikini. Most of the images of me on my Instagram, I'm fully clothed, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm dressing in a relatively respectful manner depending upon what culture you're from and whatnot. You know, if you're, you know, extreme Muslim, you probably would think it's not that great, and if you're someone that likes to wear, you know, not very much all the time, you probably think I'm very conventional. And so, you know, there's a sliding scale, but I think it's about what you look for in a woman and how, because, you know, some guys, they really like it when their woman dresses really sexy. They like it when other people look at their woman. You know, maybe that's something else you need to look at. I don't know. You know, we can always pick holes in our ego at all sorts of things, but you also have to go with what you feel is fun and in alignment with you in your life. So I would look at how you carry yourself. So, for example, you know, if you're an alpha man, you're probably going to want quite a friendly woman, quite a warm, loving, kind woman, but also a woman that knows how to put into place boundaries and isn't scared to do so. So, you know, I can be very warm, kind, friendly, polite, but I also find in my personal experience at this point in my life, I don't really find anybody really oversteps with me because there's a certain conduct. The other thing is also things like, you know, is she falling out of a nightclub drunk? Can she look after herself? Same goes for men. You know, I personally don't find it attractive when men are drunk and sloppy. I think that when anybody is out of control of themselves, it's not ideal, is it?
Yeah.
You know? So I would say to, you know, instead of asking about body count, I think you can get an indication. Plus also there's no point asking these things because you're never going to know. Whatever the answer is that she gives, you don't know if she's telling the truth or not. And it's the same the other way around. So I think it's, what is it you're looking for? What kind of data are you looking to gain? And, you know, what we said about, you know, communication, it's like only 7% of your communication are the words that you use. So look at how she communicates with you, her body language towards you, towards other people, the way she carries herself, the way she conducts herself. You know, if she is wearing something that's a little more revealing on a particular day to a particular event because it's more appropriate, how does she carry herself in those outfits and those days? You know?
Yeah. I think as you develop on your levels of mastery as a man as well, it's easy to spot these things, and you know energetically whether you're going to be aligned with someone or not.
100%.
You likely will get to the point where you'll be so tapped in with yourself, and you'll be at a level of consciousness where you'll interact with certain women, and you'll know within a couple of minutes or so if this woman's actually someone who you could gel with for a long period of time.
If you're always looking for data and proof, you're too in your masculine, and you need to lean more into your feminine. So you're probably not going to find the woman that's right for you because you're out of alignment with yourself. If you're seeking too much data rather than feeling into the connection and feeling into her. Plus also, no one comes ready-made for us, you know.
Exactly.
I remember being younger and wearing a lot more like revealing clothes and outfits. And I remember having a disagreement with one of my ex-boyfriends, and he was the one that provoked this awareness within myself of like, oh, I've been subconsciously seeking validation and, you know, seeking that from men because of my own father wound. And, you know, he approached it in quite an aggressive manner. But I'm really pleased that we had that discussion because that made me realise, I need to stop this behaviour. That's not who I want to be. That's not what I want to attract into my life.
Yeah.
But it took him saying that to me. And, you know, I was in my 20s and that was a learning curve. But yeah, I remember once I had, like, you know, as a woman, you kind of like, you come, it's a bit different as a guy because you guys kind of like, not all look the same, but a man that's in good shape is a man that's in good shape. As a woman, you can have long legs, skinny legs, thick thick waist, thin waist, big boobs, small boobs, perky boobs. It's never ending, you know. There's so many different body shapes. And so as a woman, when you start to like get breasts and thighs and bum and stuff, it's like, and you see the way that people react to you, it's like you've got this superpower all of a sudden. And so you're like learning how to handle that. And obviously you're young. You don't know how to handle that kind of energy. You never had that before. Especially if you've been abused or neglected, or you've seen your mum get used and abused, you know. So sometimes it's not always about history. Sometimes it's about what they've learned to overcome and the skill set they've developed as a result of those experiences. I think there's a huge value in that.
That's huge. I think like the way you're speaking about it is just from a high level perspective as well. Like it's like the way you're describing it is far beyond the ego human experience. It's like from a development of the soul on a soul's journey, going through these different things, discovering who it truly is and tapping into like its core authenticity within, which is unconditional love for yourself. But to be able to get to that point, you experience these different things, these triggers, you go through, meet these people, you have these friends, you have these relationships, you make these mistakes, and then you learn from it and you come out the other side. So for someone to ask a question that is based around, let's say, body count, for example, it's just, it can be a clear indication as to that's where the focus is, which means that it's not from an elevated perspective of that person on their own internal journey, where they can also have that high level perspective of, does it really matter? Because where are we right now and where are we going?
Yeah, and it's also egoic in the sense of you're putting that person in a box based upon the number that you think is high or low. So like for some people, body count of 50 might be huge. For other people, 15 might be huge. For other people, that's like nothing. Or they think it's a lot for a woman, but not for a man. This is all just bullshit. This is just ego, you know? What if somebody was promiscuous in their 20s and then they were celibate for 4 years? Like, where's the respect for being celibate for 4 years? You know? So I think that data's great when you're looking at stats for certain things, and it only paints the blueprint of a picture. And like you said, like when you're in alignment with yourself or near that, because you can't be in alignment all day, every day, even though that would be lovely. When you're in good stead with yourself, you don't need to ask questions like that. So again, I'd still bring it back to, what is it you're looking for? Because a question like that, this is one of the things I say to some of my clients when they're like, I just need to know if he slept with anyone while we were on a break. I'm like, why? Why? Because he might not tell you the truth. And then you've got another whole bundle of stuff to unpick. So you either know that you want to be with this person no matter what happened in between, or you don't. And you need to work on trusting yourself and your intuition and what these things mean for you. So if you really love that person, you want to be with them and you think they're good for you, does it matter if they slept with somebody else when you were broken up? Does it matter? Because if it matters to you, why does it matter to you? And you need to lean into that. I'm not saying it's right or wrong to stay with them. Everything that we're talking about, I'm not judging. I'm not saying it's bad or good. I just think there's a lot of human experience and there's a lot of things that we do when we're unconscious. None of us are born conscious gurus. Well, actually, no, we probably are as babies. But you know what I mean? As we become young adults, we've all been hypnotized and brainwashed by all the stuff. And that gets expressed for some of us in different ways. And some of us have been used and abused and some of us haven't. And so some of us have got more to unpack than others. And I think it's about looking at the human that's in front of you right now and having an understanding and empathy for the journey that they've been on and learning about them and how they choose to deal with what they've been through. So, you know, for example, I remember watching this thing recently on Instagram where this guy, basically, it was like a motivational video, and it said something like, when you're choosing your wife, ask how she feels about her dad. And women that like their dads usually tend to make better wives. And I just thought, what a limited perspective. I understand where he's coming from. Totally. It makes sense. But it's such a limited perspective, because if you take someone that has maybe not had the greatest relationship with their father or their mother or whoever, and they've been able to utilize that and turn it into something that's amazing and be able to utilize their triggers as something to make them, you know, some people are able to turn that around and become the best type of parent ever and stop all those blockages in their life. Some people can't, for sure. Like what he's saying hasn't got no value to it. It's just a limited perspective, because there will be some people that have had not great relationships with their parents and they turn out to be phenomenal human beings that are incredibly emotionally regulated and make fantastic parents and fantastic partners, because they'll do the opposite. It's the same, like, let's say you're sexually abused as a child. Not everybody that's sexually abused becomes an abuser. Some are the absolute opposite. They're like, I'll do everything to nurture and nourish my children because I could never allow that to happen to my children. It's about not limiting your perspective on the data that you receive. It's about staying open-minded and developing your own skill set to learn how to assess the people that are in front of you and the people that you want to spend time with. Always bring it back to self.
Yeah, I like that. I haven't heard many people talk about it from that perspective, because again, with the echo chamber that is the online space and the different advice that's given out, it can be very easy to have blanket statements like that, where it's like, okay, her relationship with her father now dictates her relationship with you. To a degree, that has
It'll have an
some
influence.
truth to it.
It'll have
Some
an
truth to it.
influence.
Yeah.
But
But it depends what kind of journey she's been on since
Yeah.
then. That's what matters more than anything else. And I think if we put the focus there as to how is she, yeah, that may be the case, and she maybe didn't have a great relationship or whatever the case was. How has she navigated that? And that's, if you put the focus there, then that's where you can get good data. If you're looking for data, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because naturally, as men, we are, a lot of the time we're looking for data. That's how we make sense
yeah,
of
I
things.
hear
But
that.
it depends where you're looking for it, you know? So instead of having a specific statement of she is this way because, and I'm going to now hold her to that, it's like, okay, let's look at the journey that she's been on. And then also coming back to like the journey that you've been on as well.
Yeah.
The accountability that comes with that. So yeah, I think that's very important.
Yeah, I mean, I can use myself as an example. You know, I was very vulnerable and said my relationship with both my father and my stepfather it's been far from ideal. You know, huge abandonment wounds, rejection wounds, lots of pain. But now my job is literally to coach people on how to emotionally regulate themselves, to teach them how to have better relationships and to improve their communication. So I myself am a direct reflection as to why that man's blanket statement is not completely useless. I don't want to devalue what he's saying. I think that he's got a certain level of consciousness that he's reached where he's actually looking at childhood trauma as an indicator, which is great. We should be looking at things like that. But we should be taking it another step further. How did they use that to their advantage? Could they do that? Have they done that? Have they even begun that journey? Because sometimes people are on that journey, you know? Like, what if you had a parent that was a prostitute and the other one's a drug addict, but yet you've turned out to be the next Gandhi? Maybe Gandhi's not the right
Extreme
example there. But yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
You know, they could be the next Teal
Yeah.
Swan. You know, like look at Teal Swan's background. You know, she'd make a phenomenal wife and mother, and yet she was, you know, treated atrociously as a child. So I think it's about how have you taken your experiences and used them to your advantage.
Yeah.
What have you done with the things that you've been presented with in life is really more what I'd be looking at when I'm looking for a partner,
100%.
whether I'm a man or a woman, looking
Yeah.
for a man or a woman.
And with all this being said, where do you see humanity going? Like, because the levels of consciousness is such an interesting, it's simple, but it's also very in-depth and can be very complicated. Because I think, yes, we all have our own level of consciousness that we're developing, and our level of self-mastery is coming with that, our healing that we're doing, and how we communicate with others, and how we build businesses that are more aligned and driven by love instead of fear, and creation and all that. But on this path of raising in consciousness, there's also a collective consciousness that is being raised or either amplified or extracted and being pulled back down. And then you have the earth, which also has its own consciousness. So when we look at things from that perspective, over the next 20 to 30 years, I think it's going to be very, very interesting because of this journey and awakenings that people are having. And then you have, you know, I'll never forget TikTok when it first came out was one of the best platforms to spiritually awaken, because everybody was spiritually awakening and then sharing it on TikTok, and it was going viral. So I remember seeing that on my For You page all the time. No, I don't use TikTok anymore, but that was an example of that just spreading like wildfire.
Yeah.
That helped with this whole collective awakening. And I think we're at a point now where people are just trying to integrate it. And it's less about the usual typical personal development, self-help stuff that's out there that gets regurgitated constantly. It's more about which is fantastic advice, by the way, but it's more about the integration of that with the spiritual realm, and then being able to advance with that from a place of understanding where the planet is going, and then where we're going as a humanity as well. So I'm curious as to how you see the collective moving in a direction.
Okay, so I actually think that we're going to see a big divide.
Yeah, I would
So
agree.
I think we're going to see those that are becoming more conscious. We're going to see a lot more conscious women calling up conscious men. There's a lot of women that I speak to that are like, where are these men? And then I meet guys like you, and I'm just like, oh, they exist. They're there. They're coming. They're right here. And then we see the opposite, where I meet, you know, some guys that are sleeping around, they're a bit lost in the sauce, as I like to call it, and they believe that they're alpha, and they're on their journey. They're gonna, at some point, hopefully, realize there's a better way. And I think that then if we zoom out and we look at some of the politics that's going on the planet, you know, I find when you lean into sort of consciousness, source, God, whatever you'd like to label it as, whatever label works for you, you start to realise that wrong and right is not a real thing. You know, politics, you know, liberal, Democrat, all of them. It's two wings of the same bird, you know.
Yeah.
If you really think that you're right because you vote one way, then you're just lost, you know. And I say that with love. Everything I say it with love. But, you know, it's triggering because awaken. And so when we zoom out and we look at the narratives that we get given, you know, if you think about the events of 2020, there was a lot of lies told. And that separated those that were more conscious with a more critical thinking skill set from those that are operating more from fear and struggle to save themselves, so allow authoritative bodies to create a scenario that they need to be rescued from. And there are narratives at the moment that are being pushed and were pushed then and are picking up pace. So things like global warming. Now, I'm not saying that that's not a real thing. Absolutely, the climate changes. We have always had ice ages. But the idea that, you know, we need to find another planet to live on because we've used and abused this one is, I find it to be naive and slightly narcissistic, because Mother Earth is the boss. If we use and abuse her enough, she will just wipe us out. We don't need to find another planet to live on. I think that we will see that there is a lot more space and land available to us, and you're going to start seeing a divide in consciousness. So that those that are more conscious are more aware of what is happening in the orchestration of things. And I'm not slating any of this, by the way. You know, all of this serves huge purpose. But I think we're going to see a divide. I think you're going to start seeing things like there's going to be like a huge price to spend time in cities. I think you're going to see a lot more of the AI movements. You're going to start seeing like a lot of chips in hands. You know, if you know, a lot of control over your financial status. All cash will be gone. And you'll start to see the divine feminine and the divine masculine that do not want to be a part of things like that will start to create another world. There'll be a lot more land bought up, a lot more living independently, a lot more not leaning into the system. And then there'll be those that maybe realise a little bit too late, or those that still live in the system, and that's okay too. And for those people, you know, what I'm saying would be really triggering for them, and they won't believe it, and they'll think that I'm wrong, and that's also okay. I don't need to be right. You will see. And so I think we're going to be pushed, all of those that are on that path of evolving into more consciousness, that divine masculinity, that divine femininity. I've never witnessed such a strong awakening at such a strong pace. If you look over history, now is the time for awakening. And if you're not on that path and not moving with that energy, you know, like a lot of people, sometimes I hear them say they feel stagnant. There's no such thing as stagnancy in the universe. The universe is always an ebb and flow. And you're either in movement with that ebb and flow, or you are not. And that's what will cause you to feel stagnant.
Yeah.
And I think that, we're going to see big divides. I think we're going to see like almost two worlds take place. You know, I remember there were a lot of memes that used to say like, there's the new world and the old world. And that's what that kind of is. You know, the people that will be sort of like living off the land and creating new societies and new ways of schooling and refusing to just follow what authorities say because of fear narratives that have been created. And I think then there'll be those that are willing to live amongst the fear narratives a bit more, none of which is wrong. Whatever you choose for yourself is divinely orchestrated, and whatever feels right and aligned for you is what you should choose.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's like, the way I see it is like the shift from 3D level of consciousness, like that dimension, into 4D, which is kind of where we're in, and we're kind of in that middle phase, and then up to 5D, and then that will evolve the way it's meant to evolve. So
Absolutely.
It's fascinating. Now, you mentioned something key there, which was the planetary system, right? So let's talk a little bit about astrology, because that's something that I've learned quite a bit about myself and how that works from you. So how could someone, from a like baseline understanding, use astrology and the planetary system to understand more deeply about themselves?
Well, there's lots of modalities, right? So you've got things like the human design, you've got astrology, life path numbers, etc. And all of them are beautiful modalities and tools to help I kind of look at it a bit like a blueprint. It's kind of like, you know, if you were going to rob a bank, you'd get like a blueprint of the building, right? And you know where all your exits and your entrances are. And I feel like astrology is a bit like that. So I think you're going to find somewhere between sort of 60% to 100% accuracy, and different astrologers will pick up different things. And then, you know, you've got the more generic ones with stuff that is regurgitated online that sort of creates a blueprint for you. But having a real astrologer is always going to give you a bit more insight. But like I said, different astrologers will pick up on different things. Some astrologers really focus on astrology for business. Quite often they're men or divine masculines. Fantastic insight for money, business, etc. And then you've got some that are really good for relationships, karma. You know, one of the skill sets that I have is you can tell me a scenario that you're experiencing, and I can tell you what your karmic lesson is and how it will heal your lineage. And that's quite an unusual skill. So astrology can really help with things like that. So for example, let's just take it down to basics. We are starseeds. So when we are all born, the sun is in a different part of the sky, and then the moon is, Venus is, and Mars is. And so the sky is labelled all the signs, so Aries through to Pisces. So Aries at the beginning of the zodiac, Pisces at the end of the zodiac. So, for example, Aries tends to be a sign that is, I always think of them a bit like toddlers, you know, they're quick to anger and then they get over it really quickly, you know, because they're the first sign of the zodiac. They're a younger sign. Pisces are often very full of wisdom, quite intuitive, usually quite spiritual. They're quite, you know, akin to those sorts of things because it's the last sign of the zodiac. It's the oldest, the wisest sign. And astrology is also, you know, there's a lot of, I don't like to say conspiracy theories about anything. There are a lot of theories about astrology that, you know, they've purposely given us incorrect data about astrology. And there's a 13th sign and a 13th month, and that's why all of our months are out of sync, because if you add up 28 times 12, there's space for another month and a day. So there's definitely space for that discussion too. But the reason why some people don't believe in astrology is because there's a lack of education about it. I often say that sometimes you know enough to believe that you're correct, but you don't know enough to know that you're incorrect. And that's true of all of us. I'm sure I have moments like this too. And so, for example, let's say your sun sign is in Cancer and your moon is in Cancer too, and then maybe your Mars is in Leo. So, for example, your moon is what governs your emotions, because the moon is the planet that governs water, and water represents our emotions. Then if you look at Mars, it's how you take action on something. And so if your Mars is in Leo, as opposed to Scorpio, as opposed to Aquarius, how you take action on things is very different. Mars is also the planet that rules things like war and sex, what we fuck. And so on an individual level, it can control how you take action in your business, how you like to make love, how quickly you are to become aggressive. Again, this can also be part of your nature-nurture argument as well. But then if we zoom out and we look at the collective, when Mars moves somewhere, and Pluto, that's also a planet that controls war or governs war, if they move into certain places, because everything has a birth chart, countries, businesses, it will govern what happens in big business, and it will govern what happens in politics. So if you look at, for example, if you go back to, is it 1776 when America was born?
Ooh.
I think it's I always get it confused between 1774 and 1776, but we'll go with 1776, I'm pretty sure. If you look at the astrology that's coming up in 2030, the astrology is almost the same as the year that America was born. So I would expect to see the politics in America become increasingly more active until 2030. And it would be possible around the time of 2030 that America could change its physical boundaries, its geographical boundaries. And that there'll be a lot of political movement at that time, and maybe some civil unrest.
Interesting. Wonder Trump will have a big part in that. I wonder. We'll see.
And then, then if you were to, so it'd be really important to look at Trump's personal astrology as the president of America. And if you were to look at his chart, his birth chart, his progressed chart, and then overlap it with the chart of America, you might be able to predict what's going to happen, huh?
Yeah, it's fascinating. Like, it's because I'll never forget this saying, which is like millionaires study strategy, billionaires study astrology.
Yeah, JP Morgan said that.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
And that's because, there's actually, if you start to study financial astrology, there's a lot of people that will want you to be quiet.
Yeah, I've heard
Because
that.
you can study things like Bitcoin will have a birth date. So you can work out maybe what's going to happen for Bitcoin.
Yeah,
And so, in terms of your personal astrology, looking at things like, so let's say romantic compatibility. Your sun sign's important, yes, as is your rising sign, because your sun sign is it's the bulk of your personality, but your rising sign can be how a lot of people see you. So, for example, I'm a Taurus, my sun sign's Taurus. I'm very Taurian, but my rising sign is Cancer, like your sun sign. And I think I'm perceived a lot like a Cancerian, and I really gel very well with Cancerians. But my moon sign is in Sagittarius. I have a lot of Sagittarian traits too. And I think this is why lots of people, they misunderstand astrology. They say, well, all Aquariuses can't be the same. Absolutely, all Aquariuses are not the same. Absolutely, I totally agree. But if you look at the chart, you're going to see different ebbs and flows of that energy. And also, different parts of your chart get activated at certain ages. So, for example, we have something in our chart called a Saturn return. So Saturn completes its orbit every 29 and a half years. So between the ages of 27 and 33, you have really big life lessons and big changes and challenges, because Saturn rules life changes, karma, and our relationship with the masculine. So things like, for want of a better term, daddy issues. So you can find that between the ages of 27 and 32, 33, life can be really hectic. There can be a lot of changes. You might completely change the way that you make money. You might lose all your money. You might have a baby. You might meet the soulmate, the love of your life. You might get divorced if you got married young. A parent might die, particularly if the parent is coming up to their second Saturn return or third, so around the ages of 57 to say 63. Or it might be that you have a really big health scare. Like during mine, my Saturn return, literally the same month of my exact Saturn return, I got the all clear from having cancer. Really big health scare to wake me up. Lots of karma coming up. So, and I lost all my money too. And so, you go through these experiences around this time because this is what the universe wants you to pay attention to. And so, we find things like Mercury retrograde is a really big terminology that comes up. And people are like, oh, it's Mercury retrograde, so this is happening. It's like, no, it's not blaming the planet. What's happening is when a planet goes into retrograde, it's slowing down. And that's why it wants you to slow down. It wants you to slow down and look at the details. So Mercury represents things like our travel, attention to detail, intellect, information, communication. So if you're not slow and calm, you're much more likely to have disagreements with people because it rules communication. So it's very easy to have a miscommunication. Whereas if you're slow and you can observe people and be like, they're triggered, let me not be too reactive, let me manage my own emotions, then you'll breeze through Mercury retrograde. If you're born during a Mercury retrograde, it won't affect you so much. So if you're born when, say, 4 planets are in retrograde, in your life, when those planets go into retrograde, it will, in theory, affect you less. I was born during a Mercury retrograde, and I usually find them easier than most.
Really interesting. Yeah. I mean, I love these because they're just deeper tools to understand more about yourself.
Absolutely.
And I just love them as like data points, like astrology, human design, all these different things, just to learn more about yourself. And then you use your own discernment as to like how you navigate that and understand that throughout your time. So yeah, really, really interesting, especially as well when it comes to business partnerships,
Oh, yeah.
who you get into a relationship with, the compatibility of all these different things. It's always good to know these things just to have it at the back of your mind as well. But
Yeah, absolutely. But
yeah.
also, I think, you also don't want to create boxes in your mind of like, I would never date that sign because of
Exactly,
this.
because it's like you're labeling things and you're
It's about the balance, isn't it? You don't want to take
Yeah.
it too far the other way.
Exactly.
But, compatibility. So, for example, business relationships, I'd look at compatibility of things like, you want to look at how people managing their emotions. You want to see where the weaknesses are in the chart and if the other people have strength where they have weakness, because then it balances out and it could be a great business partnership. Whereas for romantic compatibility, you need to have things like your moon need to be really compatible. Your moon sign, your Venus sign have to be very compatible. Mercury, because that's the way you think. So it's not always about the sun signs being compatible. It's actually, there's a bit more going on, there's a bit more depth.
Yeah, I love it. Yes, this has been a very interesting, in-depth conversation. I can't wait for people to listen to it.
Thank you.
Where can people find you online? Where do you hang out? And if people want to get in contact with you, like where are you going to be hanging out?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram, which is, I'm always very active on Instagram. Yasmine Gould _ Yasmine with an S and an E on the end. Gould is spelled Gould. I'm around, DM me. I'm always happy to have a little chat and see if I can help you with whatever it is that you're struggling with.
Awesome. Love it. Let's
Thank
go
you
get
for
some
having
food.
me. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we
go.
love to eat.